Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We find ourselves in the 9 days. May these days be transformed to days of joy and jubilation. But doesn't mean just because of the 9 days we can't work on our spiritual journey. Doesn't We don't take breaks. There's never a break from a spiritual journey. Not Yom Kippur, not the 9 days, not summer vacation. It makes no difference. You got to always work on it. And today we're gonna begin chapter 9, Perek Tes. And it starts sort of a new section. What I mean by that is, up until now, we've been introduced to the two nefashos, the nefesh elikis, the godly soul, and the nefesh habahamis, the animalistic soul. And then we went into detail. What is the makeup of those souls? We spoke about the 10 levels in each one, how they function, what their garments are, how they express themselves. And now we're going to go to a conversation, an important one. How does it play out in your body? In other words, very nice. In theory, we have a godly soul and an animalistic soul. What does that look like in our daily battle? But before we get to the actual battle, we need to know how it plays out in the physical body. We are all physical human beings. Now, the Rebbe did not write the Tanya for malachim, for angels. And he didn't even write it for tzaddikim. As I said in the introduction, he wrote a Sefer Shel Tzaddikim, a book for tzaddikim, but it was burned and never went public. This is a Sefer Shel Beinanim, and this is for the average Joe to be able to serve Hashem properly. And if you are to serve Hashem properly, you need to know, every one of us needs to know, how the nefesh elikis, the godly soul, the nefesh habahamis, the animalistic soul, how they function within our bodies. And that's really where we're going to go today. They say, I think it was Mendel Futterfas, the great chassid, who said that he heard Dor Mipidor. He heard it from someone who heard it directly, going back to the chassidim of the Mittler Rebbe, of the second Lubavitcher Rebbe. And they said, the Mittler Rebbe demanded of his chassidim that whenever they meet each other, when two chassidim run into each other in the park, in the grocery, on a plane, on a boat, wherever they run into each other, they should discuss lofty concepts from chassidus. What about the simple chassidim who are not capable of understanding the lofty ideas of chassidus? So they once overheard two simple chassidim having a conversation, right? They met each other. You meet each other, you have to talk about something to do with your spirituality. You can't speak about stuff that are super in depth because you're not up to that. So they heard one guy say to them, "Nu, wie geht es bei dir? How's it going by you?" And he said, I started off the day by giving the first punch to the nefesh habahamis, to the animalistic soul. Then he punched back. Then I gave him a big kick. And he was describing basically his entire day of how he's been wrestling with his animalistic soul, with his Yetzer Hara. And he said, but the goal for me is that at the end of the day, I get the last kick in. That I'm the one that knocks him out. Meaning the battle is real. It doesn't make you a bad person or a unhealthy Jew to have a battle. The question is, who wins at the end of the day? Who's overpowering who? So before we get to the actual battle, which will probably be, next week's Tisha B'Av, so I don't know, it'll be next week, probably in 2 weeks, we'll talk about the actual battle. We need to first understand where the Nefesh Elikis functions and where the Nefesh Habahamis functions. It says the Alter Rebbe, Perek Tes, chapter 9, V'hinei, Mokei Mishka Nefesh Habahamis, B'klipas Noiga B'chol Ish Yisrael, the animal soul, from Klipas Noiga, within every Jewish person, even though we said already in chapter 1 in Perek Aleph, that generally the Nefesh Habahamis functions in the blood. But if you want to get into more details, what does that mean? The primary housing department, the primary home for the Nefesh Habahamis, for the animal instincts, the animal soul, the evil inclination, who believe b'chol smali, it's in the left chamber of the heart, shumali dam, which is filled with blood. Uksiv, and it says, and this goes back to what we said in chapter 1, ki adamu ha-nefesh, that the blood is the soul, v'lachein kol ha-taivas v'isparus v'kaz v'deimim b'alev, which is why all your desires, pride and anger, etc., come from the heart. Where do people's problems stem from? Where do their temptations stem from? Where do their interest in things they should not be interested in stem from? It stems from the left chamber of your heart, which is the source of the blood flow, which is the home of the Nefesh Habahamis. In other words, Alter Rebbe is saying that when it comes to sinfulness, when it comes to temptation, when it comes to desires, when it comes to pleasures, when it comes to any emotional outburst, and he gives examples here of anger and pride and ego, it doesn't originate from your intellect. It originates from your emotions. We are emotional basket cases. Some worse than others, some better than others, but as a rule, if you ever want to see a society in decline, if you ever want to see an individual in decline, you will see someone that is overly emotional, where everything is being dictated by emotion. That is not the way of Chassidus, definitely not the way of Chassidus Chabad. Because once the Nefesh Abamis is located, obviously we're talking about figuratively, it's not a physical object, but its primary presence is in the left chamber of your heart. And from the heart, it spreads throughout the whole body. And also goes up to the head, to the brain. Where those feelings are thought about. So you had feelings, you had desires, you had temptations. They started as an emotional interest. Now you allow it to go up to your brain, and you can contemplate and use your intellect to solidify the desires, to justify the desires. But it's secondary. The intellectual justification comes after the emotional interest. Just like your blood comes from your heart and spreads from your heart to your brain and to the rest of the body, the rest of your body, so too the Nefesh Abamis, its interests start in your heart, in the left chamber of the heart, and then it spreads everywhere. If you forget about spirituality for a moment, which we'll talk about soon more in detail, your heart is the source for most people. I'm not talking about Aristotle and Socrates, who everything was about their intellect, Einstein. For most people, the real yeshus, the real ego is not in the brain. Right? Someone hurts no one ever says someone hurt my brain. No one says someone hurt my intellect. Okay, sometimes you could say they're so stupid they hurt my intellect. But most people don't say you hurt my intellect. Most people say you hurt my feelings. Why is that? Because feelings, emotions are very easy to get hurt. And if we allow that to dictate how we respond, if every response is an emotion-based response, we become animals. Animals are instinctive. They don't think it through. Right? You know those parents in the playground? I had it once in my life with one of my children, and Baruch Hashem, I de-escalated it. But one of my kids messed with a kid or at least they claimed messed with a kid on the playground, and the father of this kid was a Marine, and he came over, and he had a prosthetic leg, so you had to have Rachmanis in the process also. And it's angry with Schrei, he started screaming, if your kid touches my kid, I'm like, it's two kids on the playground. I said, of course, it's terrible, my kid. And I de-escalated it, but in my mind, I was like, you're an adult. You're allowing intellect to dictate how you respond. But so often when our emotions are running the show, egos involved, and interests are involved, and agendas are involved, and desires are involved, it's yeshus. The brain may be less emotional, maybe less passionate, but at least if used properly, if utilized properly, the brain is the place of thoughtfulness, where you think things through before you become an emotional basket case. Think about most conversations today. Forget about spirituality for a moment. Even practically in America, how much of the conversations today in America are dictated by emotion? You can't have a conversation. Pick your topic. The Iran war, gas prices, transgenderism, Palestine, what else? Taxes, climate change. Pick your topic in American politics discourse. If you say the wrong word to the wrong person, there's not going to be a person like there used to be two adults in a room having a conversation. Oh, that's an interesting thought. It's right away. You're a Nazi, you're a communist, you're killing the Constitution, you destroy, everything's emotional. We're Chassidus Chabad. Chabad is about utilizing Chachma Bina Das to be guided by your intellect. Why? Because as he's about to say in a moment, the Nefesh Elikis, your godly soul, is stationed. Its home is in the brain, not in the heart. Your Nefesh Abahamis is in the heart. Nefesh Elikis is in the brain. Obviously, there are Hasidim that are called Chagas Hasidim. They're very emotional. They dance a lot. They scream a lot. When they daven, it's like the noisiest place on earth. The shreit, they're dancing and screaming, and it's their path. It's Chagas. That's not Chabad. And again, God, there's different paths. Shivim Panim LaTorah. But for a Chassid, for Chabad, someone that's learning the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus, the minute you turn into Chagas, the minute you turn into an emotionally dictated life, that's not Chassidus Chabad. It's easier. It's a lot easier to live your life dictated by emotion than dictated by intellect. But this is key to it all, is that your nefesh kis is in the brain. And of course it should lead to passion. And of course it should lead to excitement. And of course it should lead to simcha and joy in serving Hashem, but guided by intellect. That's what he says here next. He says, if you want to know where the godly soul is stationed, where its home is, it's in the brain, in the head. From there it flows to all the organs. The gambalev, and also secondary, again, we're not talking about a physical object, the nefesh l'kis has a vacation home. Not only does he have a home in your brain, but he has a secondary home in your heart. Which part of the heart? The chol ha'imani she'em b'dam, in the right chamber of your heart, which is devoid of blood. And we'll talk about what that means in a moment. Like it says in Koheles and Ecclesiastes, Leiv chacham liyaminai, the heart of the wise man is on his right. So it's very interesting that in the Biurim and Tanya, in the beautiful set of Tanya Ashalim, it brings from the Rebbe. Where was it written? It was let's see. Yeah, and there's a letter of the Rebbe in volume 22 of his Igros. It's also in his notes, in his Rishimas. And there's a lot of discussion about the physical biology of the two chambers of the heart. So Rabbi Steinsaltz, for example, in his Sefer, he doesn't even go there. He says, guys, it's metaphorical. You don't have to get into the biology. We're not talking about a physical nefesh Baham. It's not a physical godly animalistic soul. It's not a physical godly soul. It's metaphorical that there are two parts of the heart, and there's the part of the brain that represent where the primary functionality of the godly soul and the animalistic soul take place. But it's interesting, that's what Rabbi Steinsaltz says, but in the Rebbe's writing here, the Rebbe writes unequivocally, maybe that's because of the Rebbe's college education that he was able to write this. He writes, according to what it says in Sifrei Refuah, that the heart has two chambers, and they have two different jobs. This is what the Rebbe is writing. The job of the right chamber is where the blood comes to the heart without any oxygen, and then the heart sends it to the lungs. It gets its energy, it gets its oxygen in the lungs, which gives the person life. Then it goes back to the heart, and the heart takes that blood and ships it all around the body. Now, I did it right before class. I said, you know what? I can't be glatan ha'aretz. I have to look online. My first Google search, I put in, what was the words I put in? Hold on, I probably still have it here. 1 second. I don't. I put in two chambers. What are the chambers of the heart? Came back. You know, when you do the AI overview, it's the first Google search. It says as follows. Give my cook. It's mamash. The Alter Rebbe is writing the Tanya 250 years ago, and I'm looking at Mr. AI, and it says like this, from the Cleveland Clinic. They must have learned Tanya in the Cleveland Clinic. There's the right atrium. This chamber takes in used blood that has no oxygen. Mamash verbatim from what I was reading here in the Rebbe's writing from the 40s. So unless the Cleveland Clinic was reading the Rebbe's Rishimas in the 40s, it's just incredible. And the left atrium, the chamber collects the new oxygen-rich blood from your lungs and then pumps it out to the body through the ventricle. Mamish verbatim, you know, it's once in a while, it's nice to have science support what we learn in Chassidus. So the heart has two chambers. It has the right part. And that doesn't necessarily give your physical body support. It's taking the blood that needs oxygen, pumps it to the lungs, and the lungs gives you the oxygen, the oxygen-rich blood back that you can pump to the whole body. But at the end of the day, what's giving the blood to the whole body to keep it alive? That's the nefesh habahamis, the left chamber, because it's keeping the physical body, the animals being kept alive. The right chamber, and primarily the brain, is where the nefesh elokis hangs out. And if we start living our lives, if we at least attempt to live our lives in a way where the godly soul that's in our brain is the key component that guides us, then we have hope. I think I mentioned it in so many classes in my life that I don't remember if I shared it during the Tanya classes, but there's a good chance that I did. That the Hebrew word for a dog is kelev. Kelev comes from two Hebrew words, kuloi lev. It's full of heart. If you had a dog, other than them being miserable creatures that poop on your floor when you don't want them to, they're also very lovable, cozy animals that love their owners. They protect their owners. They're full of heart. They don't have seichel. But in Yiddish they say, hat seichel van a katz. He has seichel of a kitten. As an owner of a dog, I'm telling you that the dogs are not far behind the kittens as far as how smart they are. Meaning they're smart, but intellectual decisions are not from them. When a human being allows the left atrium, the left chamber of the heart where the nefesh habahamis is functioning, to control everything, and it shoots up the blood to the brain, and instead of your brain guiding your heart is guiding your brain. You decided you want to eat something that you know is not good for you, or to drink a beverage that you know is not good for you, or to smoke a vape that's not good for you. You felt that, you wanted it, it's emotional, it's an attraction, it's a temptation. Now you need to justify it, so you allow the blood to go up to your brain will justify it for you, and now you'll have a full package. But if it starts in the brain, imagine, is this vaping good for me or not? There's nothing you're going to read that's going to say yes. So it doesn't mean you'll resist it necessarily, but at least you'll have some level of knowledge and intellect to help guide your heart not to make instinctive decisions that could be harmful. Now, if you take all of what we just said to spirituality, when it comes to mitzvahs versus averos, sins versus mitzvahs, what's the number one reason people do a sin? Contrary to public opinion, it's not because they're heretics. There's very few actual heretics. I don't believe in the 13 principles of the Rambam. No, that's not why. The famous Maisa, the famous story with the three guys in the bar discussing why they married out of the faith in Russia. One guy said, I married out of the faith because I wanted to marry the Paritz's daughter, and to do that, I had to convert to Christianity. The other guy said, well, I was trying to get a big job in a company, and the only way I can get it is because I had to convert, be baptized. The third guy says, I was studying Jewish philosophy, and I realized, and they cut him off, and they said, sweetie, that you can sell to the goyim. We know the truth. Don't try to make it philosophical. You didn't choose Christianity to leave the Jewish faith because of philosophy. You chose it because it was either easier, you thought it was easier, or you had a particular temptation, a woman, a guy, a food, a restaurant, a job. There was something very mundane. When Jews leave the path of Hashem, it's nichnas b'hem ruach shtus. They have this spirit of insanity that comes through them, but it's based on emotion. And part of the emotion that we justify with later is that Hashem will understand. No, he won't. Who told you Hashem will understand? It's a Baba Maisa. He will not understand. He told you not to do it, and you did it anyhow. Now, will he forgive you? Yes, we say every day in davening. Hashem gives forgiveness. And unlike a physical person, he'll give you forgiveness every day, even if you mess up every day. Like we learned in Tanya this week, in the Chitas, from Igeres HaTshuva. But to say that God understands that you chose to abandon him because of emotional temptation, because of an emotional desire, and now you're trying to justify it, that's the Nefesh Habahamis. So yes, you're a Jew, so it comes from Klipas Noiga. It's a Jewish demon versus an idolatrous demon, but it's a demon, and you're being guided and dictated by a demon. Let's call a spade a spade. If your nefesh elokis, which is primarily in the brain and a little bit in the right chamber of your heart, was guiding your life, guiding our life, we'd all look a lot better. Remember I told you a few months ago that my great-grandfather has a sefer. It's called Sefer Zikaron Rav Brook, the guy I'm named for, Sheol Brook, who was a mashpia in Rishon LeZion in Tel Aviv, he wrote down the Tanya teachings that he got from his teacher, Shmuel Groenem Esterman. So on this subject, on Perek Tes, he says this: the Hebrew word for taste, for pleasure, is tam. Tes ayin mem. Tes ayin mem stands for orev, mo'il, and toiv. Orev means sweet, pleasurable. Orev lechech, something that tastes good in your mouth and your cheeks. Mo'il is something that's helpful. Doesn't necessarily taste good, but it's helpful for you. And then there are things that are toiv, that are actually good for you. So he says, the idea of orev, having something that's sweet and delicious and tasteful, humans, Jews, non-Jews, animals, everyone has that. Those are things that our animal self is interested in, things that are delicious. Then there are things that are good for us, like medicine. Doesn't necessarily taste good, but it's good for you. And then there are things that are toy, that are actually good. Like what? Like deep intellect, even non-Jews, even philosophy, something that, good music, it's good for the soul. So he says, pleasure, joy, things that taste good, alright, that's for everything, everybody. But when it comes to things that are good for you, that are helpful for you, and that are good for you, that already depends. For a non-Jew, their general joy of things that are good for them and that are helpful to them are things that are physical. When it comes to a Yid, when it comes to a Jew, that's not enough. In order to experience true things that are helpful and good, the moil and toiv, for that you need the nefesh of the kiss to function. There needs to be a godly, holy, spiritual component for the Jew to actually feel that they're being helped and that they're experiencing good. So if you don't allow your nefesh of the kiss, your godly soul, to function within you, you are depriving yourself as a Jew from something that is a staple for your functionality. Guy says, I learned Judaism, I learned and I don't feel it. What do you mean you learned? What did you learn? The Torah is it's a massive thing. It's a lifelong journey. There's no one, it doesn't exist for someone to go into even if you came to my house in Bozeman, you came to my library and I took you downstairs. So if you don't like Reb Moshe's Shalos Teshuvos, so we'll look at Reb Shlomo Zalman. If you don't like that, we'll look at Reb Avad Yosef. If you don't like that, we'll go to the Ben Ish Chai. You don't like that, we'll go to Mordechai Eliyahu. There's no way you're going to sit in my library for half an hour, an hour and a half, and not find delicious, intellectually stimulating, godly experience. It does not exist. Not for a Yid. You could love sushi. You could love relationships. You could love sexuality. You could love mountains and nature. That's all either stuff that are for the nefesh habahamis, for your animal soul, or even if it's for your godly soul, for your more refined soul, your intellectual soul, your nefesh hasichlis, it doesn't have the God component the way Ashtikul Torah does, where you're actually connecting with Hashem in a mitzvah or with learning Torah. And that's really the battle. People sometimes think that they're schizophrenics, and sometimes they are, and that's a medical condition, a mental health condition that needs to be treated. But so often we get upset at ourselves because we feel like we're spiritual schizophrenics. But the truth is, we shouldn't get upset. That is the truth. Sometimes the nefesh habahamis is really giving us a run for our money and making us be interested in things that hoyeli sia. God help us all. But we have to fight back. You got to be like the chassid in the beginning. Give my zets back and say, what do you mean I have an nefesh of a kiss? I want godliness. I want kedusha. I want my brain to make decisions. Do you know how sad it is? You know how we say about children today, all the great psychologists, they tell you how everyone needs structure. If they don't have structure, they feel like they're lost. Kids thrive on structure, and it's true. Guess what? Adults thrive on structure too. And Jews, neshamas, also thrive on structure. And the structure is the Torah. And when we allow ourselves to have structure, and remind ourselves that this is a battle of structure versus no structure, of intellect versus emotion, of godliness versus animalism, of desire versus being a mensch, then there's a little better chance that once in a while, maybe a few times a day, you'll give up some good zets. You have a good punch, a good kick to the Nefesh Abamis, say, bug off. Right? The Gemara famously says, in Paga b'chamanuvel zeh, if you meet this disgusting creature, the evil inclination, moshcheu lebeis hamedrash, schlepp him to the beis medrash. He can only fight with you when you don't have the ammo. Right? You said you went to the range. When you go to the range, if you go to the range with a gun, but you don't have ammo, it ain't going to help you. If a guy breaks into the house and you say, hey, I have a gun, he's not going to care about if you have a gun. He's going to want to assess how much ammo you have. So if you want to fight the Yetzer Hara, you better have ammo. How do you get ammo? What scares the Yetzer Hara? What scares the Nefesh Abamis? What allows in this battle for the Nefesh Elokis to win? You need ammo. The ammo's Torah. Moshchei lebeis hamedrash. Give him spirituality. And then you won't even have to fight him. He'll run away on his own. And he ends off what we're going to learn today. He says, when you allow the right chamber of your heart, when you allow the Nefesh Elokis, the godly soul in your brain to function, what happens is things change in your heart. What does he mean by this? Avas Hashem kirishpe shalheves mislaheves b'leiv maskilim. This produces a love for Hashem that is like a flaming fire, flares up in your discerning heart. When you use your brain to analyze and come to recognize ideas which arouse love for God. When you use your brain and you think about the things that we're meant to think about, which we discussed some of it in the beginning of Tanya, what happens is now you can be aroused with a love for Hashem. And what are those things that you think about? First of all, how Hashem's light and energy is in all physical objects of the world. Think about that every physical object, even though you can't see it, has Hashem's light in it. Number two, how far your life is from God and how close you would like to be. I'm so distant, but I want to be closer. When you think about that, it sort of guides you to want to act on becoming closer. Furthermore, how the malachim, the angels, worship Hashem with total dedication and love. You say, if the angels, the malachim do it, I'm not going to do it. How in its source, the world is all, the entire world, the entire universe is absorbed in Hashem. It's all within Hashem. And number five, how Hashem renews, how Hashem renews the energy of the world every single minute, every single moment. And the nature is so incredible. You take all of that and you contemplate on it and you think about it and you, I'm not even saying some massive meditation, some level of contemplation. Now you're starting to be aroused with a love for Hashem, or at least some level of love. And then he adds one more thing, because those ideas were already, in each in their own way, were discussed already before. But now he says, "V'chein simchas levav," the divine soul, the Nefesh Elokis, can have joy in their heart, B'sif eres Hashem v'adar goyna, in the glory of Hashem and the splendor of His majesty. What does that mean? When the eyes of the wise man that are in his head, using his mental powers of Chachma and Bina, gaze at the glory of the King and the beauty of His greatness, which is unfathomable, endless, and limitless. In other words, the Zohar says that you can end up gazing at Hashem. What does that mean? It's not physical. What it means is that in the mind's eye, in the mental contemplation, you start experiencing what seems like sight. You end up feeling like you actually are so close to Hashem that you could technically see Him. Obviously, it doesn't mean physically. But through a lengthy meditation, through a lengthy hisbainanus, you reach the point where Hashem becomes tangible and real. And what is that through? That is through the deep contemplation about the glory of Hashem that exists everywhere. When you start realizing that no matter how much you're going to contemplate, Hashem is endless, He's Ein Sof, and therefore you're never going to fully contemplate it, you're never going to fully understand it. When you realize how vast it is, that in itself will arouse, not only arouse a love, but you'll feel almost like you can see it. That takes work. Like everything in Chassidus Chabad, if you want easy, okay, I was going to say find another religion, but even within Judaism, you can go to Chagas Chassidim, like I said in the beginning. You can go dance your way out of it. The Alter Rebbe demands that we utilize the faculties that Hashem has given us, our brains and our hearts, in the specifics of how the Nefesh Abamis and Nefesh Elokis function. There is explained elsewhere. And he says, and the last words for today are, And say, in addition, the other holy emotions of the heart also originate from Chachma, Bina, V'dash, Mechim, from the Chachma, Bina, and Das of the brain. So all of our emotions originate from the brain. If that's the case, if we have a healthy functioning brain, a healthy functioning nefesh elokis, then we have hope. But if we allow our emotions to run the show, God should save us all from ourselves, because we're going to end up being emotional basket cases, which is how we started. So that's the foundation of understanding where they each function in the body. But how does the actual battle, how does the actual wrestling match play out? For that, you got to hang tight for next week, where we'll continue with chapter 9. Actually, next week, I don't know. I'm a very powerful guy, but at 7 p.m. on Tisha B'Av, right before we have our Mincha Minyan, pretty sure I'm not going to be teaching Tanya. And so it'll be the week after. And I look forward to that and to continue this journey in the beautiful Sefer Tanya Kadisha. Sei gesund. Everyone have an easy fast next week, or even better, should be zeicha before the becoming of Mashiach, not only so we can have a barbecue during the 9 days, but that truly, like I said in the beginning, may these days be transformed to days of joy and jubilation, the car of Mamash speedily in our days. Sei gesund, gute Nacht.